both John and Ivan, from what I understand, are committed to the notion of human givens. And I think that's terribly important, which is to say, in my language, I'd say life is given to humanity under certain conditions. Now, whether or not you're a believer, you have to acknowledge that none of us really asked to be here. We found ourselves breathing and in a state of some consciousness one fine day in our childhood, and since then we've sort of taken this life as a given. But somehow our egos are structured or promoted in such a way that we tend to believe that we are in control of our biographies in every detail. Never is the case, is it?
No.
You don't decide your birth, you do not decide your death, you do not decide your illness past a certain point, and a host of other things, including your parents. A large number of things which are terribly important to human happiness and destiny are outside our hands. So the idea of human givens has to be recovered and restored to its due place and dignity. And if we are to see through this fog, I think that's terribly important.
Welcome to CSEER Dialogue. Today's dialogue is reflection between past and future. Your host for today is Sunil Rao. This session will be moderated by Kabir Rao, and the session is being recorded and transcribed. The forum will be open for questions and reflection at the end of the dialogue. Over to you, Sunil.
Thank you, Ranjani. And I want to thank Ivan, John, Wasimji for consenting to take part in this dialogue, and for all who have joined us, for listening in, and who are still wanting to join in and listen. And I'm sure all of you have received, we've just had a brief interaction amongst all of us, but the ones who we haven't spoken to must have received an email which shares a brief on our speakers. Some of you may know them in person, but I want to take this opportunity to introduce them once again. Mr. Ivan Tyrrell co-founded the Human Givens approach with psychologist Joe Griffin, and together they have written numerous books which have been best-selling books on mental health, well-being, psychology, counseling, dreaming, depression, the origins of creativity and consciousness. He's a director of Human Givens College and is also a board member of the Human Givens Institute in East Sussex, UK, and is also a founder director of Conciliators Guild. John Bell, again, founder director, Conciliators Guild, a very distinct diplomat here, but Conciliators Guild is an organization dedicated to emphasizing the importance of innate human needs and patterns of group behavior in politics. And I think as a diplomat and mediator who has worked for over 30 years on Middle East politics with the Canadian government, the United Nations, and several international mediation and peace-building organizations. With that kind of an experience, and also he's got a distinction of being an author of a wonderful book. I think if people haven't heard or read it, they should. How to Tame the Political Animal, The Missing Piece. Dr. Aseem Srivastava is a Delhi-based writer, teacher, ecological thinker. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He has taught courses on global and Indian ecosophy in Indian and Western universities over several years. His mentoring has produced a wonderful and promising initiative called Pug Dundee, which can be, in English could be a footpath. It's a wonderful initiative. We've seen that in action. And I'll quickly share a brief about CSEER, which is a Center for the Study of Evolution, Enlightenment, and Reintegration. what it aims to bringing in people from various disciplines together for conversation, deliberation, and carving the way forward for us as a species. I don't know if I have done much justice in introducing all of you in a little formal manner. I would rather have preferred a more informal, but since we have some people who don't know or who don't have a context, we wanted to do that. But I welcome all of you, and I'll hand this over to Kabir, who's studying philosophy at the University of St. Andrews. He's going to be moderating and taking the dialogue further.
Thank you very much, Sunilji. Before we begin, I would like to ask, despite my wishes to the contrary, that each speaker try to fit their remarks within 15 to 20 minutes at best. My first question to you is about the way you view the world today. In each of your perspectives, do you sense a buoy, an inflection point in history's curve today? And if so, what does it look like? I'd like to pose this question first to Ivan, then to Asimji, and then to John.
Gosh, thanks, Kabir. I certainly do think we're at an inflection point, but I think it's one that's appeared hundreds of times throughout the world with all the little rises and falls in civilization. And I think we're in we've gone through the stages that Glubb and others talk about the rise and the development of commerce, and the development of luxury, and development of universities. And then there's sort of what follows on from that is a sort of degeneration. And I think we're in a degenerative stage. So that's the inflection that I can see all around us personally. But of course, I wasn't alive in the past, and none of us were, to see these things happen. But I feel that what we're sensing now is the same as what happened in the past to other civilizations. But it's sort of speeded up in our culture because of the technology that we're using now, and the international nature, the globalist nature of interactions between different communities. I was very interested in the innate needs of human beings. The first and primary one really is the need to learn. Every baby comes into the world, we all did, needing to learn to walk, for example. And that was a struggle for babies. If you've ever seen a little baby struggling to stand up and then falling over, then standing up and then falling over again until they master standing up, and then they take steps into the world. And that same kind of struggle goes on through learning to talk, learning to read, learning to appreciate metaphor and humor and all those things. That all takes time, is an effort. But what has occurred to me, and I'd be very interested to know what other people think about this, is that is a kind of a stream of undertaking that actually comes from the universe. It comes from a cosmic mind that wants to know itself. All the great mystics have said such things as, I want to know myself, and I can do it through people looking back at me. If you use a clumsy way of putting it, the poets put it much better. But so to learn is what we're doing in order that the greater mind in the cosmos can learn more about what it's like to look at itself and to understand itself. So, I mean, I think we're at a strange state now, because an awful lot of people think that information is the same as learning. Just gathering information is the same as learning, but it's not. It's not the same as knowledge. It's not the same as wisdom. And that's where I'm coming from, really. Do you want me to carry on, or is someone else going to talk?
CMG, please.
Am I audible? Is the volume all right? Yeah. First of all, thank you to CSEER, to Sunilji, Ranjaniji, Kabirji for organizing this, and to John and Ivan. Fabulous to make your acquaintance. I've been hearing about you for a long time from Sunilji. It's a huge question, and it can be answered in a minute or in an hour, depending on what you wish to expend on it. I'll try to be very brief. It is more than an inflection point. To build further on Ivan's point, it is a strange time, which is in a sense beyond time, but in the wrong way. The entire riddle of time, which has puzzled not only philosophers, but common people throughout time, place, and culture, that riddle is being avoided. It's not being answered, it's being avoided in the way we've been asked to live in the 21st century. And I think we are on a very short leash or a very short leash, whichever way you want to put it, because the fossil fuels which have made this possible, this adventure or misadventure, if you will, since the 19th century, since coal and oil became the dominant modes of energy supply, that lease is about to expire. And there are two notions of time you can work with. One is time as an object which you control. For instance, you log on to Zoom or to anything nowadays, and you think you are in control of time, and you are basically synchronizing yourself with a certain clock time. But the deeper sense of time, which I think all living creatures, not just humanity, carries within its being, which is embodied and embedded deep in our very existence, in every breath, there's a rhythm to that time, which is not in our control at all, actually, which controls us in turn. That subjective, deeper existential notion of time is being elided in this objectification of time, over which, which holds a certain hegemony over us today because of the luxury that fossil fuels have provided for a short period of time. So this is, in a sense, a strange period of history in which we are being asked by the larger cosmic mind, to use Ivan's term, to actually examine ourselves individually, collectively, and at a species level as to what the hell is this all about? Why are we here? What are we doing here? What does it mean? And the meaning of life, which has been hijacked by powerful global political and economic and military forces, that meaning has to be taken back from the elites which control them. So that's the way I'm trying to sort of summarize my thoughts here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah. I think it's your turn, John.
Oh, okay. Thank you. First, thanks to everybody for having me on here. It's an honor and a privilege to meet you all and to have this discussion. Most interesting question. I share with the other speakers the view that we are at an inflection point, but I would make the case that it's a rather odd one for several reasons. Even though, yes, I agree with Ivan that it has happened before, but it's odd first. The first reason I think it's rather unusual is that, that old quote from The Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think it's something that we should remember well, that we're also living in an era of materialistic splendor, comfort, health and security, probably like no other. In other words, people across the world have a sense of wellness, that material wellness, physical wellness, that they've never had before in the history of humanity. And we should not underrate that, because first of all, it's the reality we're all living. and at the same time, and therefore it affects our mental state as well. And second, because it does the opposite. It deflects us from what Asim and Ivan have just mentioned, which is our deeper purpose, because people can get very lost within the materialistic realm. So I think that this is an important aspect of this inflection point, that if we want to actually understand what to do with it, we have to recognize this incredibly strange duality that we're living. The second point Ivan also touched on, which is that it's global. And because it's global and the interconnectedness that happens with that, two other important aspects fall out. One is, in the past, there was a kind of relay between civilizations. You know, one would die and magically or not, another one would pick up the pieces and run with it. You know, Islam led to growth in the West expanded to the Americas. Now, question number one at this inflection point, where else is there to go? If it is in fact a global civilization and it goes down, we have a problem, because who's going to pick up the relay? And I think this is something we all have to question. The other two aspects of the interconnectedness of this inflection point that I think pose risk are its fragility, because it's a virtual interconnectivity, physical also, but very virtual. And it means systems are all connected together. It means that if you touch one system, you affect all the others. That means a huge fragility. It also means the risk of overregulation. So systems of control can enter of this inflection point. And the final point I'd make before maybe going to a deeper issue is, because of my work in politics, I mean, I'm one of the elites, for better or worse, that are working across the world on these global issues, political, social, etc. And I have a window on those elites regularly. A few points about that, because they do have their hands on the controls in a way. One is, they're generally well-meaning. I don't think we should take the viewpoint that just because someone becomes an elite, they're evil. They're not. They're generally well-meaning. Some are not, but most are. But the hallmark of our era is their increasing disconnectedness from their populations. In fact, I would even question whether they are connected at all to their populations. They're connected to each other globally. It's a big club, economic, social, political club, if you wish. You can stretch it and say cult. And they serve each other, as all clubs and all cults do. There's nothing unusual about that. But this disconnectedness between elites and average people is a high-risk dimension of this inflection point as well, because it means decisions are going to be made for and between elites, not necessarily for people. And secondly, it means that there isn't that connection between elites and territory that there used to be. People used to represent their land, their country. They don't read anymore. They represent themselves and their contacts across the world. Final point, Ivan mentioned the need for learning, and Asim very, I think, correctly mentioned why are we here? And I would put forward to all of us that maybe the critical dimension of dealing with this inflection point is to resurrect an interest in purpose, in meaning. Because I think without that kind of corrective, I'm really not sure that a critical mass of people can be somehow linked together in order to point us in another direction. Why? Because purpose and meaning give us context, and because we stretch ourselves into something larger than us. And as soon as we do that, we're learning, to get back to Ivan's point. And once we're learning, we change, and we realize that it's not all about my immediate interests and all that. Given the instant gratification of our world, the speed of it, etc., rekindling a sense of purpose among people seems to be quite essential today.
Yeah.
Thank you. All very important points, which we should build on. And that brings me to our second question. What are some changes in the way human societies have been organized on all levels, as far back as you find appropriate, that you think have most significantly determined where we as a collective are today? And on this, I'd like to hear first from John, then from Asimji, and then from Ivan.
Thanks, Kabir. Well, I think I've already sort of touched on it, maybe logically driven. Once we have a tool in our hands, we tend to use it. Very few of us have the wisdom not to use it or to use it in a calibrated fashion. And so digital technology, transport technology, technologies that have been really developed since electricity was discovered in the 19th century, I think that was the key turning point, have completely revolutionized our world, as we all know. And I think these technologies, whether we know it or not, affect our social and political structures. And the way they do that is by sort of two dimensions. One is they flatten everything out. So as I said, then you get a kind of connectedness between people that didn't exist before. And so people can relate to each other in ways that they never, ever used to. People used to live in a village. They'd rarely leave their village. For centuries, if not millennia, that was our lives. I travel a lot, and what I see in airports is something both magical and very difficult to understand, which is that people of various cultures are interacting with each other on a daily basis and being exposed to each other. And so there's this lateral connectivity, but as I said earlier, and probably the most important thing, is a disconnect upwards, meaning the elites then disconnect territorially from people. And once that happens, you get what I'll term political and economic irresponsibility. You're no longer tied to the land, to the local. You stop caring, and that's not necessarily, by the way, evil. It's just the way everybody is that if they don't see that the person next to them matters and that they're actually responsible for that person being their representative in parliament, and they care much more about their parliamentarian in another country than they do their own citizen, due to technological connection and the economics that comes with that, that means we're in a bit of trouble. And I think maybe beyond purpose, we have to reconnect to the importance of local culture. And that's why I think the initial conversation about local languages, I did find, I think, potentially very, very interesting. That kind of granularity, organic knowledge that comes with local languages is absolutely fantastic, and it enriches our lives. But we've disconnected from all that. And you end up with a homogenization, a way to make money at scale across the world, which is very hard for people to resist, no matter how solid they are in character. So can we develop enough elites, and in a way I use that term unashamedly, who have more wisdom in order to help correct this error? Because it is an error, because we've created a world where I'm not sure we can thrive. It's as simple as that. And that goes back to Ivan and Joe's work on human needs. Can we thrive in the world I've just described? I actually doubt it. But I'm not sure if that corrective will be easy to achieve. But anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on that.
Well, I'd like to actually first express my concurrence with what John just said, and hopefully help us travel even deeper into this conversation. I think John is absolutely on the ball when it comes to identifying the key force which actually drives human affairs, not since yesterday, but since about 2 centuries ago. And I think you're right to say that electricity is one of the key phenomena within the realm of technology, which completely redefined the nature of human existence. I think it transformed the human condition in a profound way. In ecosophy, we actually use a term called trans nature. The term is from the German philosopher Hans Jonas, and it refers to the fact that unlike in the pre-modern world, almost anywhere, or actually anywhere, modern humanity is not born to the cosmos, to the natural world. We are born in hospitals, we die in hospitals, and in the middle, we travel across hotels around the world if we are privileged. I would also like to second John's point about elites. Let's be realistic and let's not be unnecessarily or fashionably revolutionary, which is to say, elites have always been there, even in the most egalitarian cultures. And I think there are very important distinctions between the quality of elites. Even within cultures, I think the quality of elites either improves or degenerates. And I think there's very little doubt about it when you look at any culture within its own terms. I mean, take, for instance, the United States. Now, who would really argue that the American elite, when FDR was president or Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, was, orders of rank above the elites, the sort of Trumpstein, elites which are guiding the ship today? I don't think there is any argument. It's a no-brainer. There's a lot more technology and a lot less intelligence and wisdom at play. Compared to what the US was 2-3 generations ago. So there has been human cultural degeneration there, and that should be identified for what it is. So one is this point about technology, the other is the point about elites. And I think there is a third point which is terribly important, especially in a moment like this, and that's the matter of war and conquest and dominance. And I think that the fetishization of dominance or domination, the celebration of domination that we see in our time, and not just between countries, but within countries, the way in which the fact or idea of winning is emphasized at the cost of everything else. For instance, in sports. I mean, when we were growing up in the 60s and 70s, we were always told playing the game is more important than who wins or loses. That's gone through a somersault in the last generation, when winning, as the US baseball coach Lombardi once said, winning is not everything, it's the only thing. If winning becomes the only thing, you may stand on the victory stand and win your medals and, feel the glory of the nation behind you. But the net effect of that across cultures and within cultures is actually going to lead in the direction of hubris. And I rather stand with ancient Chinese wisdom, which says, celebrate your victories like a funeral. It's a bit of a hyperbole, but I think there is great wisdom to that. In other words, have the humility to acknowledge to yourself that just because you won a championship or even a war, that does not make you king of the universe. And I think that wisdom is all but lost on our leaderships around the world today. And the way in which war has become a sort of way of life. In the past, for instance, within India, if you look at India within the framework of caste, then the Kshatriyas, the warriors, were one of 4 major castes, or 4 or 5 major castes. Today, no matter what social background you come from, there is the Kshatriya element dominant in you, and there's also the Banya element, the commercial element dominant in you. So if power and wealth become the sole preoccupations of people at the level of the individual, the collective, and so on, then one should not be surprised that globalization has then unleashed what I would call a world of demographic anxiety and a fratricidal fury at the extremes. If you look at what Israel is up to right now, and if you see that as an extreme case, other cultures are not that different. Given half a chance, we tend to behave in rather bestial ways when it comes to dealing with an enemy that is unknown or alien, and so on. And lastly, I would say, one more thing. There's a great line of Raymond Panikkar which comes to mind when it comes to war. And he says, peace is a fugitive from the victor's camp. So war may ensure victory, but the immediate consequence is almost an automatic resistance that begins thereafter. And then the conflict first goes dormant for a while and then arises in a more vicious form later. Peace is not what we get. We get war, ceasefire, war, ceasefire, war, ceasefire, depending on the state of inventories. As an economist, I know how successful military Keynesianism has been to actually sustain the health, quote unquote, health of economies in the modern world. Lastly, both John and Ivan, from what I understand, are committed to the notion of human givens. And I think that's terribly important, which is to say, in my language, I'd say life is given to humanity under certain conditions. Now, whether or not you're a believer, you have to acknowledge that none of us really asked to be here. We found ourselves breathing and in a state of some consciousness one fine day in our childhood, and since then we've sort of taken this life as a given, but somehow our egos are structured or promoted in such a way that we tend to believe that we are in control of our biographies in every detail. Never is the case, is it?
No.
You don't decide your birth, you do not decide your death, you do not decide your illness past a certain point, and a host of other things, including your parents. A large number of things which are terribly important to human happiness and destiny are outside our hands. So the idea of human givens has to be recovered and restored to its due place and dignity. And if we are to see through this fog, I think that's terribly important.
Gosh, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's brilliantly put. Couldn't put it better myself. And the business of elites and war and ordinary people is something I've always been interested in. My first book was about civil defense in nuclear war. That there was something immoral about countries producing weapons that could obliterate whole towns in one bomb and so on, without at the same time creating bunkers for the population to stay in while these bombs were going off. You know, it was just crazy time back then. But that most of you don't remember what it was like in the 1950s, but it was pretty terrifying for us youngsters. And the business too of the somewheres and the anywheres. There's a chap called Godhead wrote a book about this. You're nodding, Asim, so I presume you know about Godhead's work. And he's a very interesting fellow. John and I met him for lunch once. But he's absolutely right. This thing, if you meet elites, they're just as happy in a hotel anywhere in the world, really, because they know what to do and how to live. But a lot of them are completely separated from the life of the people around them, the farmers, the villagers, the workers in the factories, the shopkeepers, and all the rest of it. To them, they're kind of they patronize them. They're hubristic about the ordinary population, and this is quite a dangerous state. That is, and you know, the races had civil wars since the start. Really, there's always been fighting and infighting, and yeah, I'm so glad you said about the human needs and the human givens. I don't know if everybody listening knows what they are, but they include such things as the need for security. You know, every baby relies on its parents for the first few years of its life for security against all the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Shakespeare called it. By the way, as an Englishman, I will apologise for the fact it was the English that really invented the use of electricity on a mass scale and the use of mechanisms to create railways and all, and cars and aeroplanes and so on. Most of that knowledge and ability came from England, and it's spread around the world. But we kind of, now it's disparaged by many, but in fact, it's done a huge amount to make life more comfortable for people. Apologize for being English. Sort of, and all our inventions, but they included such things as vaccines and better mental health and political systems that are fairer and so on. So, we may have done some terrible things, but we also did some brilliantly useful things that have helped enlarge civilization around the world or strengthen it. But there is this need in humanity, in all of us probably, the need to dominate or be dominated. A lot of people want to be told what to do. If they become like rabbits in the headlights, if something happens and they haven't got the answer for themselves, they want someone to tell them what side of the road to stand on, or how to behave in certain circumstances. So there is this dominate or be dominated paradox in human behavior, which is interesting. But so the security is one need, but the need for community is another, and there's several other needs. The need for accomplishment, for example, the need to be able to do something so that you feel that you've contributed, you've made something and added something to the world. The biggest need of all there probably is the one that we've all alluded to so far, which is the need for meaning and purpose in our lives. When people lack that, they become suicidal. They literally become depressed. If there's no reason for getting up in the morning because there's no purpose to the day, they will become anxious and depressed very quickly, and then prone to addictions. I mean, I could go on talking about that forever, but I'm not going to now. Someone else can take over. But thank you, Asim. I thought that was, and John, that was really interesting.
Thank you. I think my last question to the three of you, which I want you to go on for a bit about, is what we've just touched upon. Asimji, Ivan, John, you've raised the matter of human givens and human needs. And I just want to interrogate that a bit more deeply. How do you see the tension, or do you see a tension between an unchanging thread, a set of tendencies, dispositions, and facts of human nature as they were, between them and the historical conditions we found ourselves in? How do you see that tension, and how do you see where it's landed us today? I'd like you all to go on a bit deeper about that. And I'd like Asimji to respond to that first, then John, and then Ivan.
Well, if you will permit me, Kabir, to take a few minutes, I'll share a story which I often tell students in class and outside. And I apologize to those of you who've heard this story from me before, but it's just such an evocative story, and it's a true story which actually happened, that it will reveal the contours of some of the key challenges we face now and how life has changed so profoundly in our times. So I was, for my sins as an economist, invited to a conference in South Korea in 2012. This was an IUC, an International Union for the Conservation of Nature conference. And I was presenting a paper with my deceased Mexican friend economist called Alejandro Nadal, who used to advise the opposition in Mexico, working with the Zapatistas in Mexico and so on. And Alejandro and I were presenting a paper on the macroeconomics of sustainability. This was still the time that I used to think of ecological challenges in terms of sustainability rather than renewal, which is the way I now think about it. And what happened was the following. I'd made a friend previous to my visit to South Korea in Bangkok once. And this friend was a teacher of English in Seoul. And he said, if you ever come to South Korea, let me know and come and stay with us. And he went by John. He had a Korean name, but in the English-speaking world, he called himself John. And so John was kind enough to pick me up from the airport. Not very common in the modern world anywhere. In Delhi, very few people would do that. And then he took me home, and it was an apartment on the 16th floor of a middle-class locality in Seoul. And at some point, I said to John, do you think I could make myself a cup of tea? This is one weakness I have not been able to address. At least one cup of tea a day I like, with sugar and milk. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry, we don't have a kitchen. So I said, what do you mean you don't have a kitchen? What do you do for food? And he said, well, he took me to the French window in his living room, and he pointed to the street down there, and he said, we go down to the restaurant, or we get takeout food from there. I found that a bit weird. And then I said, where's your family? You talked so much about your wife and kids. Oh, they live in Florida. I said, what do they do in Florida? So, well, here my children used to come 30th and 40th in class, and there they come first in class. And so they're doing well in their studies there, and my wife is doing an MBA. I said, okay. And then came about 8 o'clock, and then he said, if you don't mind, I'll watch my favorite TV show. And what was that? It was a single woman chomping on her noodles out of a bowl and telling some stories and jokes in the meantime. And there was this orchestrated television laughter. And after, that's the name of the show, Mukbang. And, I found that extremely weird. But then at the end of the hour, I tried to ask him, John, what was so funny about everything she was doing and saying? And she says, in South Korea, we are a commensal culture. We like to eat together. And, now we are all in different places in different parts of the world. So we watch the same show. And after that, we get on a WhatsApp video call. And then we laugh at the same things all over again. Now, the paradox of not building kitchens in homes in a commensal culture, and then to have to enjoy this so vicariously or distantly, I don't know the word, remotely for it, I found that extremely strange. And then the final part of this story is when I returned to India, I was invited again for my sins to a government conference on food and agriculture in Delhi. And the opening statement was made by the CEO of Kellogg's in India at that time, a tall American from Texas. And his first line was, our goal is to liberate Indian women from the kitchen. Now, you see, after that, I called my feminist friends in the evening and I said, you've been gamed, and you've been gamed so well that you have no idea that you've lost. You think you have won, you've actually lost. And you need to understand the new terms of the battlefield you were born on. So my point here is that unless we scratch the surface of our lives today, and actually look at every moment of our lives as a sort of transversal account of existence. And this is a very, shall I use a pompous word and say a trans-rational or a non-rational thing to do. It's all sorts of associative memories that are linked to the idea of a home, for instance. Something as basic as that. And now in ecosophy, I've developed the notion of earth alienation relying on the work of Hannah Arendt from the 1950s as to how modern humanity, not just because of technology, for various complex forces, has actually got more and more divorced from the physical earth that we live and abide and thrive on. What John was trying to say earlier, the phenomena of deterritorialized elites is a dangerous trend beyond a certain point, because the alienation that you experience from your own people is so extreme. And with that, the alienation from the land, from the forest, from the water, that it is no surprise, it should be no surprise that you get an ecological crisis. Because if one place is exchangeable for any other place in the world, It's like one home is exchangeable for any other home, one mother is exchangeable for any other mother in the limiting case. It's, in a sense, without any intentions implied or any evil implied, a direct attack on the most mammalian affections of humanity.
Yes.
And what could be more perilous when you think through these things carefully? So the devaluation of the home that has happened willy-nilly because of the sheer speed and scale of action, human action that technology has enabled. One of the unintended consequences of that is this devaluation of the home. So there are people now in this world, elites as well as middle classes, who may have more than one house they can go to and sleep in. They can have 10 houses, they can have 50, they feel homeless. And there are people who sleep on the sidewalks of Delhi without a single house who do not feel homeless. What do they have that the Bill Gates and the Donald Trumps, the amount they go on about family values is a kind of a paradox, because it's they betray a sense of loss in their emphasis on family values. Because when families are strong and family values are rooted, you're not going to talk about it so much. You simply live it, you take it for granted. It's when those things erode that you start talking about it. So that to me is one of the most alarming things. And of course, there's a lot more to say about this. But what it then means is that in terms of the human givens, we can no longer take the home for granted, the community for granted, the family for granted, any relationship for granted. And what does it all amount to, and where is it all rooted, is a very good question to ask.
Well, I agree with every word Asim has said. So first, let me say that I think you described it extremely well. You, especially using the term home, I think it's a wonderful metaphor for what's being a bit further, Kabir. I'm very grateful to know Ivan as a dear friend and colleague, but also that because he and Joe Griffin, let me use the term resurrected, because that's, I think it is a kind of resurrection, resurrected the idea of human needs as human givens, and reminded us all of what I think is a human universal. I do think they've described basic motivations, needs that all humans have across the world. So we need to come back to that. That's point number one. But I'd like to add a word to all that Asim said, because in my experience, human needs are lived out through, I'd use the word culture. It's impossible to live out a human need without a cultural pattern, a habit, a ritual, a past, a heritage, a history, a future. And I think ethnic and national cultures, religious cultures are all today in extreme risk because of globalization and because of the homogeneity that comes with the ease of travel, the ease of information access, the superficiality, very frankly. It's also easy that it makes the toil of living out a richer, deeper culture less attractive to the majority of people. So I'm just really adding another layer to all that Asim said, which is that human needs, as Ivan and Joe have put forward, are the baseline, but we live them out culturally. The cultures provide for our needs, almost all of them, you know, educational habits, how you achieve what you achieve is culturally defined. It's not just, it's partly individually defined as well, but it's also culturally defined. So I want to add that just so we also are aware that this globalization phenomenon is eroding culture. By the way, I think it's also important to be a bit calibrated and not be black and white about these things, because as much as it's easy for me to say this, I also see that a lot of people, including younger generations, are trying to maintain a balance between being global actors and citizens and maintaining their local and national cultures. So it isn't completely black and white. People do value their national cultures. And I think it's important to remember that and build on. But I'd like to say two other things about human needs, one of which came to my mind exactly during this conversation and listening to both Ivan and Asim speaking. And it's about dominance, and it's about a key human need, status, actually. So before I go there, I should say something that is my perception, and happy to hear others' comments on this. I think politics throughout the ages, I don't think it's today, are marked by one thing. As soon as somebody is an elite or a leader, they're removed from everybody else. It isn't just our modern era that does that. As soon as you represent others as a leader, you are somehow distinct from everybody else. You're the leader and they're the citizens. So that distinction changes the relationship. It's no longer a flat line, no matter how much ideologies such as communism attempted to reflatten everything. It's actually impossible, because people, once they control resources and decision making, you're automatically talking about a hierarchical situation. It's automatic. Because that happens, people in politics, people who control resources and make decisions for people, are sort of on a stage removed from everybody else. Okay? And I think this is a critical aspect of political life that most people who aren't in political life aren't quite as aware of. There's a distinct they represent. Once they're on that stage, the theater on the stage, the play on the stage, can take precedence over the people that they represent. And to take it back to human needs, on that stage, the needs of status and of security of the people on the stage, and not the citizens, is actually a priority over everybody else's, which is why you get wars. And why you get wars where the only people suffering are the citizens, and the elites are cutting deals with each other. I think we may have just witnessed that between the Americans and the Iranians, by the way, exactly that and nothing else. So I think it's important to make this distinction, because in order we know how to deal with human needs politically in a more astute fashion, because political actors, sadly, tragically, except unless they're statesmen and women, are less concerned about the needs of their citizens than they are about their own needs and the needs of the people on the stage with whom they're interacting. So that's, and by the way, I think this is cross-cultural across all history and across all ideologies. I don't think that there are any nation and any ideology, any structure that has escaped this reality, which is this: you can manage it better or worse, and Asim was right that some elite qualities are very different across time, but it's a distinct problem politically. Final point, and it goes back to human needs again. And the work of Ian McGilchrist, which I think is really critical, I see as one of the few ways around this, to correct this problem, maybe once and for all, if there is such a thing, maybe not, is for the people on that stage, the political actors, to have a greater sense of context and of why they're there, and so that they relate back to beyond the stage, back to the people. This, I think, is a question of character. Some people have better character than others. But it's also a question of training and education and habit and learning. And if you get ignorant people on that stage, they're going to do more damage than people with a bit more education. And that education does require knowledge about human psychology and human cycles, as Ivan told us right from the beginning, that societies and civilizations do have a seasonal cycle of up and down. It's going to get around this until there's, to use a slightly trite term, more wisdom in politics in the future. I don't see how we get around it.
I don't see wisdom as trite, John. But no, there's another element to all this which we haven't really touched on, and that is throughout the world, all cultures and all times has a propensity to be gullible. and also a propensity to form into cults and religions and beliefs and ideologies, and to develop groupthink within groups of people. That groupthink, if it becomes powerful, can do an enormous amount of damage, financial, militarily, and economically, and spiritually, really. So I think that's something else we could talk about, that all organizations, if you have a large corporation, there will be lots of little cults in it. It doesn't seem like that's, it doesn't mean to say they're going around wearing funny uniforms and doing observations and chanting and all that. It doesn't mean that at all, but it means that they have the formation of a cult in them. So there'll be one dominant character in that group, and there will be a tendency to look askance at people who weren't in the group, weren't privileged enough to be part of this little cult. And that can be in an industrial enterprise, any enterprise. People tend to form little mini cults, and those cults sometimes grow into big cults. Some of them are quite harmless, or relatively harmless, like, for example, a cult can form around a football team or something like that. And that's pretty healthy, really, as far as I can tell. But nevertheless, it's the same almost mechanical formation of a cult or belief system that happens, that makes people feel that they're better than the people who aren't in that cult. You see that certainly in football teams, don't you? But football fans. But you see it in between countries. Some countries feel automatically that they've got nothing to learn from other countries and other cultures, and that's a terrible thing too. So I think that that's an element we should remember: groupthink, cult thinking, and yeah. And I think that Ian Gilchrist, who both John and I have met on more than one occasion, is very interesting, his work. I don't know if everybody here knows about this work, but it's to do, Asim clearly does, you're nodding away. It's brilliant. He's taken this idea, or not idea, this observation that we have two hemispheres, and the two hemispheres do different tasks for human beings. The left hemisphere tends to want to categorize, to measure, to reduce things down to something it can manage, and it wants to grab and own and possess things. Whereas the right hemisphere is complete contrary to that, really wants to understand. It wants to look at the wider picture all the time, wants to keep an open view without coming down and grabbing and telling people what to do and so on. It wants to understand the bigger context all the time. And that's in our biology, it's in these two hemispheres, that difference. Now, the world that's computerized now is very left hemisphere dominated. And that kind of thinking, that left hemisphere thinking, produces with something I absolutely loathe, is an excess of bureaucracy. We all need a little bit of countering, but we don't need the massive amount that cripples the lives of people. When you have to fill in dozens and dozens of pages of tick boxes to just get a little grant that any normal person would say, yeah, you deserve it, here it is. But no, they put you through this horrible ritual of tick box filling in. And that's bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a left hemisphere dominated means of obtaining power over other people. And power is, it destroys not only the people who are having it inflicted on them, but also the being of the people that are exercising the power. The easiest way to exercise power is to be able to say, no, you can't do that legally. And if someone does that, that's hugely destructive to the need for people to feel they have volition, they have choice, which is another need. We need to have volition in our lives. So. Move it on, Kabir.
Asimji has a few words to say. Please, Asimji.
I took Kabir's permission privately to add a point which occurred to me while both of you were speaking, and I tend to broadly concur with everything that you say, and particularly what you say about McGilchrist. Ever since I discovered him, I discovered a new hemisphere in my mind, which I was not paying much attention to, and one of the wisest living public intellectuals, I would say, anywhere. Somebody who really needs to be read and digested and discussed, because you don't have to agree with everything he says, but he asks all the right questions, in my humble opinion. And I'm an amateur in the field of cognitive science, neuroscience, and psychiatry, and so on, or brain science. What I wanted to introduce into the discussion, with your permission, and very humbly so, because I think in the face of the formidable questions that are being asked in this discussion, as well as in the world around us, or by the world around us, let me share a quotation from Mahatma Gandhi in Hind Swaraj. Which is a highly neglected book, which we were not given to read in school or college. Nobody asks you to read that book. People ask you to read the Communist Manifesto instead. And I was 17 when I read the Communist Manifesto, and exactly twice that age, 34, when I first read Hind Swaraj, which I think is a manifesto for what I would call civilizational renewal and recovery and renewal. It's written not just for Indians, but for people anywhere in the 20th and 21st centuries. And therein he makes two statements which are never quoted, never. I have not seen them quoted in print anywhere except one article in which I happen to quote those two things. One is, money renders a man helpless, which sounds like a sort of naive, medievalist daydreamers, rhetoric. And the other is, I'm worried about something, and that is that we are turning away from God. And it's the second sentence, which is linked to the first one, which I want to make us think about in relation to what John has said very accurately about elites across time, place, and culture, as well as about the imperatives of realpolitik and the constraints under which people in office who sit at the high tables, they operate. The point of distinction between elites that I was talking about half an hour ago sometimes has to do with the fact, and this is coming from some awareness of Indian political and economic history. It comes from the fact of whether or not a people or an elite which owes its origins to those peoples has an element of religious faith. And I think John talked about religious and ethnic cultures earlier. Here is my take on this in a brief few sentences. You see, if you look at the Indian past, there is a very creative tension, and not just the Indian past. You can study the Islamic past in West Asia and Asia Minor as well, and some of you know more about the Middle East than I do. There is a certain creative tension between the Sufi and the Sultan. In the same way as in so many parts of India, there is a creative tension between the Raja and the Sadhu. Now, these are not two poles of power, or sometimes they might be, so much as two poles of truth or two poles of reality, which in mature cultures, which manage to stabilize their relationships between these two poles, actually there is an element of parity between these two poles. So for instance, to take an obvious example from India, when the Mughals were ruling India in the 16th, 17th centuries, down to the early 18th century, one of the great kings is Akbar, 1556 to 1605. He was king at the age of 14, and he remained king for the next 49 years till he died. And Akbar was illiterate. Akbar was pretty violent as a conqueror, but quite wise as a ruler later on and often benevolent. And he was often advised by a wazir or a prime minister who was of Hindu background called Birbal, happened to be from my caste. And Birbal is famous for making fun of the emperor in public, in court, and many of these stories are recorded and recounted. And Akbar took it not just in jest, but sometimes with, respect for some wisdom. My point here is that there have been elites like that. There have been cultures like that, which are respectful of religion. And in fact, Akbar evolved a religion of his own called Deen-e-Ilahi, which involved seeing the poor as carriers of the divine, that the poor live closer to God than the rich. There are stories which we read in school, one of them called Daridra Narayan, which means the same thing, that God lives in the hearts of the poor. So the kind of humility that lends then to the culture and the elites and the so-called representatives or protagonists of the people, that humility is terribly important. For that matter, if you go back to Plato's Republic and the old Platonic riddle of how it is impossible to get a good state of human affairs unless philosophers become kings or kings become philosophers. What is real and what has happened in time and across space and culture is that there is a king, very powerful, very influential, and there are philosophers, very powerful, very influential in their own realm. They sometimes combine in the form of a Marcus Aurelius or some, extraordinarily charismatic and compassionate figure at once. But that sort of combination in one body, in one being is rare. Usually there is a division, some kind of, tension between the two sides. But the question is it a productive, creative tension, or is it a destructive one? And I think one of the big problems with modernity, and I think McGilchrist's line of thinking is consistent with what I'm saying here, or rather the other way around, what I'm saying is consistent with McGilchrist's scientific discoveries, which is that in a dualizing, left-brained modern culture, either something is or is not the case, and it excludes at least 5 other or 6 other possibilities, according to forms of logic which exist in many different traditions. And I think McGilchrist is pointing to that, what is called often fuzzy logic by the logicians and so on. But so many of the interesting alternatives, they actually exist between the black and the white and need to be spoken, need to be negotiated. And if I'm not mistaken, with this, peace deal, which may be happening, it seems, on Trump's 80th birthday, shall we call it peace deal? This is one of the reasons or one of the ways in which it could come about for however long it lasts, that you're actually exploring this gray area with some creativity and imagination.
Well, if John and Ivan, both of you, if you have any remarks on that, I'd like to hear them briefly, and then we'll move on to questions after that.
I think Asim's points are excellent and most interesting, the tension between, let's call them Sufi and ruler and sultan. I just wonder one thing, though, and I agree that, well, first, I think it's more and more important in our era that tension exists and is played out within individuals, even though in the past that has been rare. I agree with you. This is just a feeling I have, and feelings can be very wrong. That I think we're entering an era where that internal development, because that Sufi Sultan tension is in every single one of us, and so those who work in the political realm should probably cultivate that more and more consciously than in the past. In the past, it was a bit random. You'd get a Marcus Aurelius once in a while. You'd get a great statesman once in a Lincoln. maybe this should be a more of a conscious learning process for leaders because of the importance of their roles, instead of just being a structural system, or maybe you need both. So that's just one remark. And the other quickly is, Ian McGilchrist has been really pushing, at least recently, and to my great pleasure, by the way, as well, the idea of the importance of myth and religion in society. And I share that with him. And we don't have enough of those. But again, I also wonder whether at this inflection point, the old sense of religion may never come back. This sense of these broad dispensations that people cling on to and follow. Maybe they will. I just have a feeling we're getting beyond that, and that the work is so personal, so individual, as it's always been. But maybe this awareness that each one of us is responsible for his own lot takes on a stronger and stronger emphasis and activity in the future. I mean, that to me is real religion anyway, and could be our saving effort if more people do it in a sensible, common sense fashion, rather than cults, as Ivan said earlier. So.
Yes, gosh. The one thing that came to mind when you were talking, John, there, and a scene, I thought both of the things you've both said have been absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed this. People who have power and wealth seem to have this feeling that they've got nothing to learn. They think, I've made it, I've done it, I'm the Prime Minister, I'm the this, I'm the that, and I've got £1 million in the bank or whatever. Yeah, what can somebody else come along and teach me? Some humble sort of Nasruddin character, or some Harlequin or Joker, somebody who's not at my level in terms of wealth and power. What can I possibly learn from them? And that cuts them off from learning new things. And you see this in the academic world tremendously. If you're a professor, somehow you're supposed to be an expert in all sorts of things, and you pretend as if you are. If you go on television and say, we've got Professor so-and-so here, and you are asking him a question, nothing to do with his field, but he will confidently talk as though he knows, but he doesn't. Oh, it's so frustrating to see this sort of behavior in the human race. But anyway, sorry, that was just a thought that came to mind, John. I'm sorry, but I think
you're completely right, Ivan.
But I've really enjoyed this, Kabir, this talk, I must admit. Are you taking questions from anybody else, or?
Yes, we're just going to open it for questions. But before that, thank you very much, John, Naseemji, and Ivan. I've enjoyed this discussion thoroughly. And I'm sure more things will come out now that we'll open up for questions.